Picture this. You are standing on a dusty field somewhere along the northern frontier of the Roman Empire. The ground trembles beneath your feet. In the distance, a low rumble grows into a thunderous roar as hundreds of heavily armored horses surge forward, their riders leaning into the charge. Sunlight glints off polished helmets and the points of leveled lances. This is the Roman cavalry, the unstoppable force that conquered and held an empire stretching from the misty highlands of Scotland to the sun-scorched deserts of Syria. But behind every one of these magnificent warhorses, behind every charge that broke enemy lines and every patrol that secured a distant road, there was another kind of soldier. Not a warrior with a sword, but a healer with a steady hand and a keen eye. This is the story of those forgotten heroes. This is the story of Roman veterinary medicine. When we think of ancient Rome, we envision gladiators, legions, and emperors. We rarely stop to consider the animals that made it all possible, the horses that carried cavalrymen into battle, the mules that hauled tons of supplies across mountain passes, even the dogs that guarded forts and the birds used for omens. The entire machinery of the Roman world relied on the health and strength of its animals. And keeping them healthy was a matter of life, death, and empire. The Romans didn't just hope their animals stayed well. They developed a sophisticated, and in many ways shockingly advanced, system of animal medicine that blended practical skill, careful observation, and even a touch of mystery. What we're about to uncover is a hidden dimension of the ancient world, a world where veterinarians performed surgeries, developed complex remedies, and wrote detailed manuals on animal care centuries before the formal practice of veterinary science existed. They were part doctor, part soldier, and part mystic. How did they treat a battle wound? What strange ingredients did they use in their medicines? And what forgotten knowledge did they possess that we are only just beginning to appreciate? Join us as we journey back in time to reveal the secrets of Roman veterinary medicine, the surprising, the ingenious, and the utterly mysterious. This is a story of unsung brilliance, and it's one you won't want to miss. The sheer scale of animal life under Roman care was staggering, and so too was the breadth of their veterinary practice. It was a profession defined by necessity, treating everything from the mightiest beast of war to the smallest companion in a merchant's home. At the very heart of the empire's military might was the cavalry horse. These were not simple farm animals. They were highly bred, expensively trained assets, equivalent to a modern main battle tank. A single battle-trained horse represented a massive investment of time and money. Losing one to a preventable disease or a poorly treated wound was a severe military and financial setback. Roman veterinarians, often attached directly to legions, became experts in treating arrow wounds, spear thrusts, and the terrible lacerations from bladed weapons. They developed procedures to clean these wounds, stop bleeding, and prevent the infections that would have been a death sentence for both horse and rider without their care. Their success on the battlefield directly influenced the outcome of campaigns, making these medics unsung heroes of Roman expansion. Beyond the thrill of the chariot races at the Circus Maximus lay an entire industry dependent on veterinary skill. Charioteers were the superstar athletes of their day, and their teams of horses were their most valuable partners. A minor lameness or a digestive ailment could mean the difference between victory and humiliating defeat, costing owners and betting syndicates vast fortunes. Veterinarians employed by these racing factions were the best in the business, specializing in high-performance care. They managed diets, treated muscle strains, and perfected recovery techniques to keep their equine athletes at the peak of condition. The roar of the crowd was, in part, a testament to the unseen work of these specialized healers. But Roman veterinary medicine extended far beyond the glamour of the circus and the battlefield. The empire ran on the backs of its livestock. Vast herds of cattle, sheep, and goats were the engine of the Roman economy, providing the meat, milk, wool, and leather that clothed and fed millions of citizens and the armies guarding the frontiers. An outbreak of disease in a provincial herd wasn't just a farmer's tragedy. It was a potential crisis that could disrupt food supplies for entire regions. Roman agricultural writers like Columella devoted significant portions of their manuals to animal husbandry and medicine, offering detailed advice on recognizing illnesses, isolating sick animals, and administering treatments. This knowledge was essential for maintaining the stability of the empire itself. Perhaps most surprisingly, we find evidence of a deeply personal dimension to Roman animal care. In excavated ruins from Pompeii to Roman Britain, we find small tombstones erected for beloved dogs, sometimes bearing heartfelt inscriptions from their grieving owners. Birds, especially songbirds and parrots, were popular pets in Roman homes. It stands to reason that if a Roman family valued a pet enough to mourn its passing with a carved epitaph, they would also seek out ways to heal it when it fell ill. While we have fewer written records for the treatment of pets compared to livestock, archaeological finds of small collars and careful burials suggest that veterinary care, or at least dedicated home remedies, extended to these cherished companions as well. This blend of cold economic necessity and genuine emotional attachment created a unique environment where the science of animal healing was not just encouraged, it was essential for daily life. While the Roman genius for engineering and military organization is legendary, their approach to medicine, both human and animal, was often one of brilliant synthesis rather than pure invention. They were masterful adapters, taking the best ideas from the cultures they encountered and refining them for their own vast and practical needs. The foundation of their veterinary knowledge was no exception, built largely upon the profound discoveries of two ancient civilizations, the philosophical Greeks and the mystical Egyptians. To understand the Roman veterinarian is to first understand the scrolls and papyri that informed his practice. The single most influential figure in this transfer of knowledge was the Greek philosopher Aristotle. His monumental work, History of Animals, written in the 4th century BCE, was far more than a simple catalog of creatures. It was a revolutionary attempt to systematically observe, classify, and understand the natural world. For the first time, someone was applying a methodical, almost scientific lens to animal biology, anatomy, and behavior. Roman scholars pored over these texts, translating them into Latin. Aristotle's detailed descriptions of equine dentition for aging a horse, his notes on the symptoms of various illnesses, and his theories on reproduction became the essential textbook for any educated Roman dealing with animals. It provided a critical framework of knowledge, moving animal care away from pure superstition and into the realm of reasoned observation. A Roman veterinarian trying to diagnose a lame horse wasn't starting from scratch. He was building on a foundation of classified knowledge laid down centuries earlier. But the Romans knew that philosophy alone could not mend a broken leg or cure a mysterious fever. For the hands-on, gritty reality of healing, they turned to the works of Greek hippiatricists, specialists in horse medicine, whose texts began circulating after Aristotle. Figures like Apsietus, who was actually a chief veterinarian for the Roman army in the 4th century CE, but wrote in Greek, produced detailed manuals that were relentlessly practical. These were not philosophical treatises. They were field guides for soldiers. They contained step-by-step instructions for procedures like extracting arrowheads, setting fractures with splints and bandages soaked in resin, and even intricate eye surgeries. The Romans embraced this no-nonsense, pragmatic approach. It fit their worldview perfectly. They translated, copied, and disseminated these Greek manuals throughout the empire, ensuring that a cavalry officer stationed on Hadrian's Wall had access to the same proven medical knowledge as one stationed in Egypt. Yet, the Roman world was one of deep and pervasive spirituality, where the line between medicine and magic was often blurred. This is where the influence of ancient Egypt became indispensable. Along with shipments of grain and exotic goods, Rome imported Egyptian medical papyri, which contained a fascinating fusion of practical remedy and powerful incantation. The Egyptians were masters of botany and pharmacy, and their texts listed complex recipes for salves, poultices, and potions using ingredients like honey, myrrh, and frankincense, all renowned for their antiseptic and healing properties. A Roman recipe for a wound wash might directly mirror an Egyptian one, but the Egyptian texts didn't stop there. A prescription for treating an animal might also include a spell to be recited to the god Thoth or a specific ritual to be performed. The Romans, who themselves believed in noumena or spirits inhabiting every aspect of the world, saw no contradiction in this. They readily adopted this combined approach. A Roman army vet might expertly clean a wound with a vinegar solution, a known antiseptic, and then follow it by chanting a prayer to Mars or Diana for a full recovery. To them, it was about using every tool available, the logical and the divine, to ensure a successful outcome. This fusion of Greek rationalism and Egyptian mystical practicality created a uniquely Roman veterinary science. It was a system that could proudly hold a detailed anatomical chart from a translated Greek scroll in one hand and a sacred amulet to be hung in a stable from an Egyptian papyrus in the other. By not limiting themselves to a single school of thought, the Romans built a comprehensive body of knowledge that was both intellectually robust and deeply connected to the spiritual beliefs of the people who depended on it. They stood on the shoulders of giants, and in doing so, they were able to see further and achieve more for the health of their animal partners than any civilization before them. Amidst the roar of battle and the relentless grind of march, a specialized class of soldier worked with a quiet, vital purpose. These were the Mulomedici, the horse and mule doctors of the Roman army. They held a unique and respected position within the legion's complex hierarchy. Unlike a common infantryman, a Mulomedicus was a technical specialist, a munifex, which placed him on a similar level to a scribe, an architect, or an artillery officer. This was not a job for a novice. It required extensive training and a cool head under pressure. Their value was reflected in their pay, which was significantly higher than that of a legionary, a clear indication of just how precious their skills were considered to be. The empire invested heavily in these men because the lives of thousands and the success of military operations literally rode on their ability to keep animals healthy and moving. The day-to-day duties of a Mulomedicus on campaign were immense and unending. His primary charge was, of course, the cavalry's horses. Before a battle, he would inspect each mount, ensuring it was fit for the brutal chaos of a charge. After an engagement, his work began in earnest. The field hospital for animals would be a grim scene of arrow extractions, cleaning deep sword cuts and setting broken bones. They employed a variety of specialized tools that would look familiar to a modern veterinarian: probes for examining wounds, forceps for removing foreign objects, and scalpels for precise incisions. They understood the critical importance of cleaning wounds, often using vinegar, a known antiseptic, as a disinfectant wash. They stitched torn flesh and applied herbal poultices designed to fight infection and reduce swelling. But their expertise extended far beyond emergency battlefield triage. They were responsible for the ongoing health of every pack animal in the massive supply train that followed the legion. A single lame mule could delay the delivery of crucial grain or ammunition, making the Mulomedicus a key logistical officer as well as a healer. Their knowledge was remarkably comprehensive, covering everything from dentistry to podiatry. They could accurately age a horse by examining its teeth, a skill directly borrowed from Aristotle's texts. They diagnosed and treated internal illnesses, using complex herbal compounds to address colic, fevers, and digestive problems. Perhaps one of their most routine yet vital tasks was hoof care. They understood that a horse or mule with damaged or poorly maintained hooves was utterly useless. The Mulomedici were the empire's farriers, expertly trimming hooves and fitting the iron shoes that allowed thousands of animals to traverse the empire's stone-paved roads without going lame. This combination of sophisticated surgical skill and essential maintenance highlights their role as complete caregivers. The respect afforded to the Mulomedici is perhaps best demonstrated by their influence beyond the army. While they were military specialists, their knowledge was so sought after that they often advised civilian farmers and breeders. The agricultural manuals written by authors like Columella and Vegetius, which became standard texts on large Roman estates, are filled with advice that undoubtedly originated from these army experts. They didn't just heal animals. They systemized and disseminated animal husbandry knowledge across the entire empire, improving agricultural productivity from Britain to North Africa. In a very real sense, the Mulomedicus was more than a soldier. He was a highly trained professional, a respected logistician, and a keeper of advanced medical knowledge. His work ensured the wheels of both the Roman war machine and its economy continued to turn, making him one of the most indispensable, though often overlooked, figures in the ancient world. Life for a working animal in ancient Rome was one of relentless exertion and constant physical threat, placing a heavy burden on those tasked with their care. The list of common ailments was long and varied, each presenting its own unique challenge to the Roman veterinarian. In the military, the most immediate and brutal injuries came from the battlefield. A cavalry charge, while a devastating tactical weapon, exposed horses to a horrifying array of wounds: deep, ragged lacerations from Germanic longswords, punctures from spear thrusts, and the particularly troublesome barbed arrowheads used by Parthian archers were all too common. A Mulomedicus had to be an expert in battlefield triage, swiftly locating and removing embedded weapons, controlling catastrophic bleeding with tourniquets and cauterization, and cleaning the wounds to the best of his ability. Infection, which the Romans called corruptio or putrefaction, was the ever-present specter hanging over every injury. Without modern antibiotics, a seemingly minor wound could turn septic and fatal within days, making the vet's knowledge of antiseptic washes and poultices a matter of life and death. Away from the drama of combat, the most persistent and debilitating issue was lameness. The Roman Empire was built on stone roads, and while these engineering marvels allowed for the rapid movement of troops and goods, They were brutally hard on the hooves of the animals that traversed them. A horse or mule could easily develop bruises, cracks, or abscesses from the unforgiving surface. A single lame animal in a baggage train of hundreds could bring the entire column to a halt, creating a vulnerable delay. This made the Mulomedicis' skill in hoof care absolutely critical. They were masters of farriery, expertly trimming overgrown hoof walls and fitting custom iron shoes to provide protection and correct gait issues. They also diagnosed more complex causes of lameness, such as tendon strains from pulling heavy loads or joint inflammation, treating them with rest, supportive bandages, and anti-inflammatory compresses made from herbs like arnica. The diet of these animals, though carefully managed, presented another set of problems. Legionary mounts and pack mules were typically fed a steady diet of barley, hay, and fodder grass. While nutritious, a sudden change in feed or moldy grain could easily lead to devastating digestive colic. The Romans were keen observers and understood the symptoms of a colicky horse: restlessness, sweating, kicking at the belly, and rolling. They knew this condition could be fatal if not addressed. Treatments range from gentle walking to stimulate the gut to more complex drenches, liquid medicines forced down the animal's throat containing herbs like ginger or peppermint to soothe spasms, and carminatives like fenugreek to relieve gas. Preventing these episodes was a constant concern, requiring vigilant oversight of fodder quality and storage. Perhaps the most insidious enemies, however, were the ones too small to see. Parasites, both internal and external, were a relentless plague. Animals stabled in close quarters or grazing in contaminated pastures were infested with intestinal worms, which robbed them of nutrients, caused weight loss, and led to a dull, coarse coat. Roman vets administered purgative remedies, often using bitter plants like lupine or leek juice mixed into their feed to expel the worms. Externally, lice, ticks, and mites caused intense irritation and could lead to secondary infections from incessant scratching and rubbing. Their treatments for these pests were inventive, involving washes made from strong-smelling substances like sulfur or walnut leaves to suffocate and deter the parasites. This daily battle against unseen invaders required a deep understanding of botany and a practical knowledge of what actually worked, refined through generations of trial and observation. Without the benefit of X-rays or blood tests, the Roman veterinarian's most powerful diagnostic tools were his own senses: a keen eye, a perceptive ear, and a sensitive touch. Their entire approach to diagnosis was built upon a foundation of intimate familiarity, a deep knowledge of what normal looked like, sounded like, and felt like in a healthy animal. This allowed them to detect the slightest deviation, the most subtle sign that something was amiss. The process began not with a procedure, but with quiet observation from a distance. A skilled Mulomedicus would watch an animal in its stall or pasture long before he ever laid a hand on it, carefully noting its overall demeanor and behavior. He would assess the animal's stance. Was it standing naturally, or was it stretched out in a way that suggested abdominal pain? Was it shifting its weight constantly off a sore limb? His ear was tuned to the animal's breathing. A soft, regular rhythm was a sign of health, while a raspy, labored, or shallow breath could point to a respiratory infection or a serious internal issue. Perhaps the most telling sign of all was the appetite. A refusal to eat or drink was universally recognized as a primary indicator of distress. The vet would note if the animal was approaching its feed with its usual eagerness or showing a complete lack of interest, a red flag that prompted immediate, closer investigation. Even the act of lying down and rising was scrutinized. Difficulty in doing either could point to joint pain, muscular injury, or neurological problems. Once this initial assessment raised concern, the hands-on examination began. Palpation, the methodical feeling of the body, was their equivalent of an internal scan. Running experienced hands over the horse's neck, legs, and torso, the vet was searching for the hidden stories written in the body. His fingers would seek out the telltale heat of inflammation around a joint or a tendon sheath, a sign of a recent sprain or strain. He would feel for swelling, whether it was a diffuse puffiness or a localized, fluid-filled abscess ready to burst. A sharp flinch or a tightened muscle under his touch would pinpoint the exact location of pain and injury. This tactile investigation was exhaustive, covering every inch of the animal from the crest of its neck down to the bulbs of its heels. The examination then moved to the body's windows, the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. The Romans placed great diagnostic value on the eyes. They looked for clear, bright eyes as a sign of vitality, while cloudy, sunken, or dull eyes were seen as indicators of serious illness, dehydration, or pain. Discharge from the eyes or nostrils provided critical clues. Its color and consistency, whether it was clear and watery or thick, yellow, and pus-like, helped differentiate a simple cold from a more dangerous infection. They would even examine the animal's manure and urine, believing these waste products held vital information about internal health. The texture, color, and smell of dung could suggest anything from parasites to digestive blockages. This entire diagnostic process was a masterpiece of deductive reasoning. By synthesizing all these clues, the observed behavior, the palpable heat and swelling, the visible discharges, the Roman veterinarian could form a remarkably accurate picture of what was happening inside the animal. It was a holistic method that required immense patience, experience, and a profound connection to the creatures under their care. They couldn't see a bacterium or image a fracture, but through this meticulous, multi-sensory analysis, they developed a functional understanding of disease and injury that allowed them to intervene with surprising effectiveness, saving countless animals that would otherwise have been lost. The Roman veterinarian's medicine chest was a treasure trove of the natural world, a collection of remedies drawn from forests, fields, and distant trade routes. It contained no synthetic drugs or laboratory-produced antibiotics, yet its contents were the result of centuries of accumulated wisdom, observation, and a deep, practical understanding of botany and mineralogy. This ancient pharmacopoeia was both vast and sophisticated, with each ingredient selected for a specific therapeutic purpose, often with an effectiveness that modern science is only now beginning to understand and validate. For treating the ever-present danger of infected wounds, Roman vets employed a powerful arsenal of antiseptics. Vinegar or acidum was a staple in every military medic's kit. Its acidic nature made it an excellent cleansing agent for washing out dirty wounds, effectively killing many types of bacteria on contact. Wine, especially a strong, sour variety, served a similar purpose. But their knowledge went far beyond common pantry items. They understood the potent antibacterial properties of honey. A thick layer of honey applied to a sutured wound created a protective barrier, its high sugar content drawing moisture out of bacterial cells and preventing their growth, while its natural enzymes promoted healing. They also used powdered alum, a mineral salt, as a drying agent and antiseptic to stanch bleeding and prevent corruption in cuts and abrasions. The Roman reliance on herbal medicine was extensive and nuanced. common garden herbs we use for cooking today were powerful medicine in their hands. Thyme and sage were not just for seasoning food. They were prized for their strong antimicrobial qualities. Crushed into a poultice or brewed into a wash, these aromatic herbs would be applied to wounds to fight infection and reduce inflammation. Garlic was another kitchen table remedy with serious medical clout. Recognized for its ability to fight infection both internally and externally, it was often fed to animals suffering from respiratory ailments or rubbed on skin infections. For soothing inflamed tissues and muscles, they turned to the emollient properties of mallows and the cooling effect of crushed plantain leaves. Some of the most valued ingredients, however, were exotic imports that highlight the reach of the Roman trade network. Frankincense and myrrh, resins harvested from trees in Arabia and the Horn of Africa, were worth their weight in gold for more than just their religious significance. In the veterinary field, myrrh was highly valued as a powerful antiseptic and astringent. Powdered and sprinkled on wounds, it helped to tighten tissues, stop bleeding, and dry out infections. Frankincense, when ground and mixed into a salve, was used to reduce swelling and soothe painful inflammation in joints and tendons. The use of these precious resins demonstrates that no expense was spared when it came to maintaining the health of the empire's most valuable animals. The mineral world offered another dimension to their treatments. Copper sulfate, a striking blue crystal, was a common and versatile tool. Dissolved in water, it created a potent antifungal wash used to treat conditions like rain rot or ringworm. It was also an effective astringent and was sometimes used in very dilute solutions for eye infections. Lead was another mineral they utilized, often in the form of lead carbonate, which they called cerisa or white lead. They observed its ability to dry out moist skin conditions and used it in ointments for sores and ulcers, unaware of the long-term toxic effects we understand today. This combination of brilliant efficacy and dangerous misconception is a hallmark of ancient medicine, where practical observations sometimes outstripped a complete understanding of physiology. Perhaps most impressive was their skill in formulating complex, multi-ingredient remedies designed to address specific syndromes. A treatment for a deep, pus-filled abscess might involve a poultice made from barley flour, honey, and rue, designed to draw out infection while soothing the surrounding tissue. A drench for a feverish animal could contain a mixture of bitter herbs like wormwood to reduce the fever, along with soothing licorice root to make the potent medicine palatable enough for the sick creature to swallow. These were not simple superstitions. They were sophisticated recipes, the result of generations of trial and error, carefully recorded and passed down through manuals and texts. Each ingredient had a purpose, working together in a way that often provided genuine relief and healing, standing as a testament to the Roman veterinarian's role as a master herbalist, chemist, and healer. When an animal's life was on the line, Roman veterinary skill moved beyond poultices and potions into the bold and precise realm of surgery. These were not crude, hack-and-saw operations born of desperation, but rather methodical procedures developed through careful observation and a deep understanding of anatomy. The most common and, to our modern eyes, controversial practice was that of phlebotomy or bloodletting. The Romans, following the Greek doctrine of the four humors, believed that many illnesses were caused by an imbalance of these bodily fluids. An excess of blood, they thought, could lead to fever, inflammation, and lethargy. To restore balance, the veterinarian would use a sharp, lance-shaped instrument called a phleem to make a precise incision in a prominent vein, often in the neck or leg, allowing a measured amount of blood to drain out. While we now know this often weakened an already sick animal, the Romans documented cases where they felt it produced a noticeable improvement, particularly in cases they diagnosed as having too much heat, such as certain fevers or inflammatory conditions. For them, it was a rational, calculated intervention based on the best medical theory of their time. The true test of a surgeon's skill, however, came in the aftermath of trauma. The Romans were masters of wound management, and their techniques for cleaning and closing injuries were remarkably advanced. After thoroughly irrigating a gash with vinegar or wine to disinfect it, the next step was suturing. Using a bronze or iron needle and strong linen thread, the Mulomedicus would meticulously stitch the torn edges of flesh back together. They employed various suture patterns, some designed to close the skin neatly, while others were meant to hold deep tissue layers in place to promote proper healing from the inside out. This wasn't just about stopping bleeding. It was about restoring function and preventing debilitating scars that could limit an animal's movement. For particularly severe or ragged wounds that couldn't be easily pulled together, they might use a figure-8 stitch to distribute tension or even employ adhesive plasters made from honey and lint to hold the edges in place while nature did its work. Perhaps their most impressive feats were in the field of orthopedics. A broken leg was often a death sentence for a working animal, but Roman veterinarians refused to accept that fate without a fight. When presented with a fracture, their first task was to carefully manipulate the limb, pulling it back into alignment, a painful process that undoubtedly required a strong team to hold the animal steady. Once the bone was set, they would immobilize it using splints crafted from wood or bundles of rigid reeds. These were then bound firmly in place with linen bandages that were soaked in a mixture of wax and resin. As this dressing hardened, it formed a lightweight, custom-fitted cast that stabilized the fracture perfectly. There are even accounts of them using a primitive form of traction, suspending the injured limb to keep weight off it and allow the bone to knit correctly. The success rate was certainly not 100%, but archaeological evidence from places like the Roman fort at Vindolanda in Britain shows that horses did survive these compound fractures and lived to walk again, a testament to the skill and dedication of these ancient surgeons. Then there was the most drastic tool in their arsenal, fire. The practice of cauterization, or firing as it was later known, was reserved for the most stubborn and chronic conditions. Using a specially designed iron probe heated to a glowing red in a fire, the veterinarian would apply the searing tip to specific points on an animal's skin, often around a chronically lame joint or a tendon that refused to heal. The theory behind this brutal-looking practice was twofold. First, it was believed the intense heat could burn out a perceived corruption or evil humor deep within the tissue. Second, and more practically, the intentional creation of a controlled burn was meant to trigger a massive inflammatory response. The body, in its rush to heal this new and significant wound, would theoretically increase blood flow to the entire area, which the Romans hoped would stimulate healing in the older, underlying injury. While incredibly painful and based on a flawed understanding of physiology, the principle of stimulating a healing response through controlled trauma is a concept that, in a much more refined way, still exists in some modern veterinary therapies. For the Romans, it was a last resort, a calculated gamble to save an otherwise useless animal, demonstrating their willingness to use every conceivable method to achieve a cure. Even the daily act of eating presented a hidden challenge that Roman veterinarians learned to diagnose and treat with remarkable insight. They understood that an animal's health truly began in its mouth. and dental care was a sophisticated and routine part of their practice, especially for their horses. A cavalry mount or a plow ox that couldn't chew its food properly would quickly lose condition, becoming weak, lethargic, and useless for work. The Romans were astute observers who connected the dots between a horse dropping half-chewed grain from its mouth, a loss of appetite, and a subsequent decline in its overall health. They identified the root cause with stunning accuracy: sharp points and hooks that developed on the outside edges of the upper molars and the inside edges of the lower ones. As a horse chewed its fibrous diet in a sideways, grinding motion, these razor-sharp enamel points would lacerate the cheeks and tongue, making every meal an exercise in pure agony. To solve this, the Mulomedici employed a procedure that is the direct ancestor of modern equine dentistry. They used a specialized tool called a lima equina, a horse rasp, which was a long, flat file often made of iron with a coarse cutting surface. The process, known as floating the teeth, required immense skill and a steady hand. The veterinarian would have to safely secure the animal's head, often using a simple twitch on the nose to help keep it still. Then, working carefully inside the mouth, he would methodically file down those sharp points and hooks, rasping them back to a smooth, flat surface. This immediate relief allowed the horse to chew comfortably again, ensuring it could properly digest its feed and maintain the strength and energy required for its demanding role. This wasn't a rare or experimental treatment. It was standard, preventative maintenance described in agricultural manuals, a clear sign of how advanced and practical Roman animal husbandry had become. Their dental expertise, however, went far beyond simple filing. They also had to contend with the dreaded tooth abscess, a deeply painful infection at the root of a tooth that could cause swelling, fistulas on the jaw, and even systemic illness. The Roman approach to this problem was brutally direct and demonstrates a surprising understanding of surgical principles. If a tooth was deemed rotten and the source of the infection, the vet would make the decision to extract it. Using a variety of metal picks and elevators, he would work to loosen the tooth from its socket within the jawbone. For a particularly stubborn tooth, they might even use a form of forceps called a valsella to get a firm grip and rock it back and forth until it could be pulled free. This was an incredibly difficult and painful procedure, but successfully removing the source of the infection offered the only real chance for the abscess to drain and the animal to recover. What's truly fascinating is the aftercare they prescribed. Knowing that an empty socket was vulnerable to food impaction and further infection, they would pack the wound with medicated dressings. These often consisted of lint or wool soaked in antiseptic agents like vinegar or wine, and sometimes even soothing substances like oil or honey to promote healing and comfort. This holistic approach, from diagnosis to surgery to postoperative care, shows a level of medical sophistication that is breathtaking for its time. They weren't just crude tinkerers. They were systematic problem solvers who recognized that the key to an animal's vitality often lay in addressing these small but critical details of its daily life, ensuring that the empire's most vital partners could perform at their peak for years to come. This deep understanding of animal health extended far beyond treating illness and injury. It reached into the very creation of life itself. The Romans were not merely passive observers of reproduction. They were active architects of it, mastering the principles of breeding and fertility to shape the animal kingdom to their imperial will. Their goal was nothing less than biological engineering on a grand scale, aiming to produce the perfect warhorse, the most robust ox, and the most prolific ewe. This was a deliberate, calculated science of improvement, and their success in it built the literal backbone of their armies and their economy. The most celebrated example of this systematic approach was their cavalry breeding program. The Romans understood that the large, powerful horses of northern Europe, while strong, often lacked the speed and endurance needed for the rapid maneuvers of Mediterranean warfare. Conversely, the swift desert breeds from North Africa and the East, while agile, could be too light to carry an armored soldier effectively. Their brilliant solution was to create a strategic hybrid. They established vast imperial stud farms in provinces known for their superior horseflesh, such as Hispania, Thrace, and Cappadocia. At these farms, they practiced a form of proto-eugenics, carefully selecting the largest and most docile northern stallions to breed with the quickest and hardiest eastern mares. The objective was to isolate and combine these desired traits, generation after generation, to produce a new type of equine soldier, the ideal Roman warhorse. This animal had the strength to carry a man in full chainmail, the speed to execute a flanking charge, the stamina for long patrols, and the steady temperament to hold its line amidst the cacophony of battle. This wasn't accidental. It was a centuries-long project in controlled heredity, demonstrating a sophisticated grasp of genetic principles long before the term was ever coined. This mastery of selective breeding was applied with equal diligence to their livestock. Roman agricultural writers like Columella provided incredibly detailed guidance for farmers, instructing them on how to choose breeding pairs to improve their herds. For cattle, the prime consideration was brute strength. Farmers were advised to select the largest bulls with the broadest shoulders and deepest chests to sire the next generation of plow oxen, the living tractors that tilled the fields of the empire. For sheep, the priority was the quality and quantity of wool. Breeders sought out rams and ewes with the finest, densest fleeces, knowing that their offspring would command a higher price at market. Even the color of the wool was a factor, with white fleeces being particularly valued for their ability to be dyed vibrant colors. This relentless focus on improving utility transformed their livestock from mere animals into optimized agricultural tools, each generation becoming slightly more efficient and profitable than the last. But what happened when this carefully laid plan for propagation failed? Infertility in a prized animal, especially an expensive breeding stallion or a champion broodmare, represented a significant financial loss and a setback for the breeding program. Roman veterinarians did not simply accept this fate. They developed a fascinating array of treatments for fertility issues, which blended shrewd observation with the more mystical elements of their pharmacopoeia. Their first step was often a practical one, assessing the animal's overall condition. They recognized that an underfed, overworked, or generally unhealthy animal was unlikely to reproduce successfully. The first prescription was usually improved nutrition, rest, and a regulated exercise regime to bring the creature back to peak physical condition. For more stubborn cases, they turned to their extensive knowledge of botany. They administered what we would now call herbal supplements, believed to act as aphrodisiacs or fertility tonics. The seeds of a plant called satyrion, likely a type of orchid, were crushed and fed to animals to stimulate libido. Another common remedy involved the use of fenugreek, a plant still studied today for its potential effects on hormone regulation. These treatments, while not fully understood in a modern biochemical sense, were the result of generations of noting which plants seemed to correlate with successful pregnancies in their herds. Yet, the process was never fully separated from the spiritual world. The Romans believed in the concept of sympathia, a hidden sympathy or connection between things. This led to some of their more unusual symbolic prescriptions. A mare having trouble conceiving might be brushed with a saddlecloth taken from a famously prolific stallion, in the belief that the essence of his fertility could be transferred. Sometimes, a small amulet or charm would be hung in the stable, inscribed with a prayer to Epona, the Celtic goddess of horses adopted by the Roman cavalry, or to the Italian goddess Diana, petitioning for their divine intervention. To our modern eyes, this seems like pure superstition, but for the Romans, it was a logical extension of their worldview. They were covering all bases, using every tool in their arsenal, from the practical and nutritional to the chemical and the divine, to ensure the continued strength and vitality of the animals upon which their world depended. Maintaining the soundness of their animals was a daily obsession for the Romans, and they understood that this soundness literally started from the ground up. The well-being of a horse, a mule, or an ox was inextricably linked to the health of its hooves. An animal with a single painful foot could not pull a plow, carry a rider, or haul a supply wagon, rendering a massive investment in training and feed utterly worthless. This made the art of hoof care one of the most critical and perhaps most overlooked pillars of Roman veterinary science. It was a discipline that blended practical engineering with biological understanding, and it revolved around two key figures, the Mulomedicus, who diagnosed the problems, and the Faber Ferrarius, the blacksmith, who crafted the solutions. The most iconic symbol of this care is the Roman horseshoe, but it wasn't the familiar U-shaped iron nail we picture today. The Romans used a remarkable innovation known as the hipposandal. Think of it less as a permanent shoe and more as a sturdy, removable boot. Crafted from a single piece of wrought iron, a hipposandal was a concave plate that cupped the sole of the hoof. It featured a curved wall at the toe and sides to contain the foot, and often had a distinctive keyhole-shaped opening at the front. But its most ingenious feature was the metal loops, or ansae, that rose up from each side. After placing the hipposandal on the cleaned hoof, a leather strap was threaded through these loops and secured tightly over the front of the pastern, essentially buckling the protective iron plate into place. This design offered incredible versatility. A unit on a long march could carry a few spare sets of hipposandals to be fitted onto animals whose shoes were worn thin or lost, much like a soldier would carry an extra pair of boots. They were particularly valued for pack animals and for horses that had to travel extensively on the empire's punishing stone roads, providing crucial protection from excessive wear and bruising. However, the hipposandal was only part of the story. Archaeological evidence, particularly from waterlogged sites like the fort at Vindolanda near Hadrian's Wall, confirms that the Romans also used nailed-on shoes, much closer to the modern design. These were simpler, flat iron plates that were heated and then skillfully bent by the blacksmith to roughly fit the shape of an individual hoof. They were fastened using heavy iron nails driven carefully through the insensitive outer wall of the hoof. The skill of the Faber Ferrarius was paramount here. He had to know exactly how to angle the nail to avoid the sensitive inner structures of the foot. A bad nail drive, or quicking, could lame an animal just as surely as no shoe at all. The Romans likely saw these two types of footwear as serving different purposes. The permanent nailed shoe might have been for animals in garrison or on farms, providing long-term protection, while the removable hipposandal was the choice for the mobile army, offering field-replaceable defense for the empire's most important logistics network, its animals' feet. Yet, even the best iron shoe was useless without proper hoof maintenance underneath. The Mulomedicus was the podiatrist to this equine empire. His first and most vital task was regular trimming. A horse's hoof, much like a human fingernail, constantly grows. On soft ground, it might wear down naturally, but on stable floors or when shod, it requires expert attention. Using a specialized hooked knife called a coulter solaris, the vet would meticulously pare away overgrown hoof wall and dead sole, restoring a balanced, level-bearing surface. This prevented cracks, splits, and the distorted gaits that lead to lameness. They were also keenly aware of the diseases that could fester in a poorly maintained foot, the most common being thrush. They recognized the telltale black, pungent discharge that signaled this bacterial infection of the soft tissues in the cleft of the frog. Their treatment was direct and effective. After carefully cleaning out the infected area, they would pack it with antiseptic agents. A common prescription was a poultice made from oak bark, prized for its high tannin content, which acted as a powerful astringent to dry out the infection, or a wash made from copper sulfate, which served as a potent antifungal and antibacterial agent. This partnership between the veterinarian and the blacksmith was a masterpiece of Roman organizational efficiency. The Mulomedici diagnosed the issue, prescribed the treatment, and performed the necessary hoof trimming and medical care. He then directed the Faber Ferrarius on exactly what kind of shoe was needed, whether a permanent nailed-on plate for a stable-bound ox, or a set of hipposandals for a cavalry mount about to embark on a campaign. The blacksmith, with his forge, anvil, and hammer, then expertly fashioned that prescription into cold, hard iron. It was a seamless collaboration between biological science and metalworking craft, a system designed to ensure that every single hoof that trod upon the vast Roman road network was protected, healthy, and ready for the immense task of building and holding an empire together. The battle for an animal's health was often fought against enemies too small to see, yet their impact could be devastating. Among the most persistent and insidious of these foes were parasites, both inside and out. The Romans were keenly aware of these hidden plagues, and their approach to eradicating them was a sophisticated blend of botanical knowledge and practical ingenuity, born from generations of observation and necessity. Internal parasites, particularly intestinal worms, were a constant threat. Animals grazing in pastures or consuming contaminated feed and water would inevitably ingest worm eggs, leading to infestations that robbed them of vital nutrients. A horse or ox suffering from worms would display a telltale combination of symptoms: a dull, rough coat, noticeable weight lost despite a good appetite, a pot-bellied appearance, and sometimes even signs of colic or diarrhea. The Roman veterinarian's solution to this invisible enemy was to wage a kind of chemical warfare using the most potent plants from his herbal arsenal. The go-to remedy was a class of bitter, pungent herbs known as vermifuges, substances that either killed the worms or paralyzed them, allowing the animal to pass them naturally. Foremost among these was wormwood, a plant whose very name speaks to its ancient purpose. The bitter principles in wormwood, compounds we now know as absinthin and thujone, are highly toxic to parasites. The Romans would harvest the leaves and flowers of this silvery green herb, dry them, and then grind them into a fine powder. This powder was then mixed directly into the animal's feed, often with something palatable like bran or honey to mask the intense bitterness and encourage the sick creature to eat it. In other cases, they would brew a strong decoction, a concentrated tea, by boiling the wormwood in water or wine, which would then be administered as a drench, poured directly down the animal's throat using a horn or a specially designed bottle. Other common anti-parasitic herbs included leek juice, which was believed to stun the worms, and the seeds of the fern plant, which contain a powerful compound called phyllocin that effectively paralyzes tapeworms. The administration of these treatments required careful timing and dosage, a testament to the Romans' understanding that the cure, if too strong, could be as harmful as the disease itself. External parasites presented a different kind of challenge, one of constant irritation and discomfort that could lead to secondary infections. Ticks, lice, and mites would infest an animal's skin and hide, causing intense itching. The animals would respond by rubbing against posts, biting at their flanks, and kicking at their own bellies, often breaking the skin and creating open wounds that were then vulnerable to fly strike and bacterial infection. The Roman strategy for dealing with these pests was largely one of suffocation and repulsion. They created a variety of oily, pungent washes and ointments designed to either smother the parasites where they lived or create an environment on the skin so unpleasant that they would abandon their host. A common treatment for a lice-infested horse or ox was a thorough washing with a solution made from sulfur. When mixed with water or oil, sulfur created a suffocating layer that would kill the lice on contact. Similarly, they discovered that a strong decoction made from boiling walnut leaves released natural compounds that were highly effective at repelling and killing ticks. The animal would be scrubbed from head to tail with this dark, astringent liquid. For more targeted treatment, or for animals with sensitive skin, they would create thick, greasy salves. These ointments were often based on animal fats or olive oil, into which they would mix powerful ingredients like powdered hellebore or crushed sabadilla seeds. This sticky, toxic paste would be rubbed into the mane, tail, and along the spine, areas where parasites love to congregate. The grease would physically block the insect's breathing apparatus, while the added toxins delivered a chemical knockout blow. This relentless, daily battle against parasites was a quiet but essential part of Roman animal husbandry, ensuring that the empire's vital engines of war and agriculture remained not just fed, but truly well. While the written records give us incredible insight into the Roman veterinary mind, it is the physical objects they left behind that truly bring their work to life. These aren't just artifacts. They are the direct, tangible extensions of the healer's hand, and each one tells a story of skill, precision, and a deep understanding of their craft. When archaeologists carefully brush the dirt from a Roman site, they aren't just uncovering history. They are essentially restocking the medicine chest of a Mulomedicus who has been absent for nearly 2 millennia. The tools they find are a testament to a profession that was both highly specialized and remarkably advanced. Among the most common and versatile discoveries are the knives. The Roman veterinarian's kit contains several, each with a distinct purpose. The most iconic is the scalpelus, a small, incredibly sharp steel blade with a handle, used for making precise incisions. It was the essential tool for everything from lancing an abscess to performing delicate eye surgery. Then there was the coulter solaris, a hooked knife with a curved, razor-sharp blade, specifically designed for the intricate work of paring and trimming a horse's hoof. This tool allowed the vet to carefully remove overgrown horn, clean out the crevices of the frog, and create a perfectly level surface for a shoe, all with a level of control that prevented injury to the sensitive inner structures of the foot. The design is so effective that the modern farrier's hoof knife is virtually identical, a direct 2,000-year legacy of Roman ingenuity. But surgery required more than just cutting. It required seeing and manipulating what was inside. This is where their array of probes and hooks comes in, instruments that demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of deep wound management. A specellum was a slender, smooth metal probe used to gently explore the path of a deep wound, like one from a barbed arrowhead. The vet would carefully insert it to determine the depth, angle, and presence of any foreign object without causing further damage. Once something was located, they would use a valsella, a type of forceps or grabbing hook, to seize and extract it. These tools had fine, sharp teeth at their tips to get a firm grip on a slippery arrowhead or a fragment of bone. The mental image is striking. A Roman army medic, perhaps by torchlight, using these finely crafted instruments to patiently and methodically remove a deadly object from a thrashing horse, saving a valuable military asset through sheer dexterity and calm expertise. One of the most intriguing and controversial sets of tools revolves around the practice of bloodletting. The Romans employed a device called a phlebotome, which often included a fleam. This was a large, heavy, chisel-like blade, often made of bronze, with a protected tip. The procedure was calculated. The fleam was placed against a prominent vein, and the back of it was struck sharply with a mallet, driving the blade through the skin and into the vessel to create a clean, controlled incision. To collect the blood, they used a cucurbitula, a small bronze bleeding cup. This cup was often heated with a flame and then placed over the incision. As it cooled, it created a vacuum that gently drew out the desired amount of blood. While we now question the medical benefits of this practice, the tools themselves are masterpieces of purpose-built design, showing a systematic approach to a procedure they firmly believed was therapeutic. The most profound revelation from these archaeological finds is not how strange the tools are, but how familiar they feel. Laying out a complete Roman veterinary kit is a humbling experience for a modern veterinarian. There is the scalpel, the probe, the forceps, the speculum for holding a wound open, and even primitive syringes made from animal bladders for administering liquid medicines. The parallels are undeniable. The fundamental challenges of animal medicine to see inside a wound, to remove a foreign object, to cut with precision, to administer a treatment have not changed. The Romans addressed these challenges with tools that are the direct mechanical ancestors of those used today. They may have been crafted from iron and bronze instead of stainless steel, and their understanding of germ theory was centuries away, but their intention, their design logic, was identical. This collection of metal, recovered from the earth, proves that Roman veterinary medicine was not a collection of superstitions and guesses. It was a hands-on, instrument-based science, practiced by professionals whose skill and technology would have been recognized and respected by any healer in any era. For all their practical skill and surgical precision, the Roman veterinarian's world was not one of cold, detached science. It was a realm where the physical and the spiritual were intimately intertwined, where a prayer could be as vital as a poultice, and a sacred chant held as much power as a surgical scalpel. To the Roman mind, illness and injury were not merely random events. They could be the result of disharmony, divine displeasure, or even malicious magic. Therefore, a complete treatment required addressing not just the body of the animal, but its spirit and the unseen forces that influenced its fate. This mystical dimension was not a separate practice. It was seamlessly woven into the very fabric of their healing art. At the heart of this spiritual approach was a deep and personal relationship with the gods who held dominion over the animal kingdom. For the Roman cavalryman and the Mulomedici who cared for his steed, no deity was more revered than Epona. Originally a Celtic mother goddess, Epona was fully adopted into the Roman pantheon and became the sole Roman divinity whose worship was dedicated entirely to the protection of horses, mules, and donkeys. Her image was everywhere. Small bronze statues and carved reliefs of Epona, often depicted seated side saddle and offering a bowl of fruit or grain to a gentle mare, adorned stables and barracks from Scotland to Syria. Before a battle, a soldier might whisper a prayer to Epona for his horse's strength and safety. After a difficult birth, a veterinarian might make a small offering at her shrine, thanking her for a healthy foal or pleading for her intercession for a struggling mother. She was a constant, comforting presence, a divine partner in the arduous task of keeping these precious animals alive and well. For those who tended the vast herds of cattle that formed the economic backbone of the empire, there was Bubona. This uniquely Roman goddess was the divine protector of cattle and oxen, the numinous force who guarded against plague, ensured fertile breeding, and watched over the pastures. A farmer whose livestock fell ill would not only examine their feed and water, but would also likely make a votive offering at a small altar to Bubona, perhaps sacrificing a lamb or pouring out a libation of milk to gain her favor and cleanse his herd of whatever spiritual corruption had sickened them. Even the mighty Jupiter himself was invoked in his lesser-known aspect as Jupiter Pistor, Jupiter the Nourisher, who was called upon to protect the grain that fed both the people and the animals of Rome. This practice illustrates a fundamental Roman belief that the health of a creature was a holistic matter, dependent on everything from the quality of its feed to the favor of the gods who presided over its sustenance. Beyond prayers and offerings, the Romans employed a fascinating array of physical objects believed to channel protective magic. Amulets were not mere superstition. They were considered essential prophylactic equipment. It was common practice to hang these talismans in stables or around an animal's neck. A particularly popular charm was the bulla, a small, round locket usually made of metal. Inside, one might find a written prayer folded tightly, a rare herb, or a substance believed to have apotropaic powers, the ability to ward off evil. Another common amulet was the fascinum, a phallic symbol that was ubiquitously believed to deflect the evil eye and malignant curses, which were often blamed for sudden, unexplained illnesses or a drop in milk production. These objects were the ancient equivalent of a preventive vaccine against misfortune, a first line of defense in a world teeming with unseen dangers. Perhaps the most intriguing blend of the practical and the mystical was found in the actual administration of medicine. A written remedy for a sick ox might not only list ingredients like crushed barley and leeks, but would also include precise instructions for a spell to be chanted 3 times while walking sunwise around the animal. A poultice for a wound might be applied not in silence, but to the rhythm of a specific incantation directed to Apollo, the god of healing, or Mars, the god of war, for strength. The famous Roman encyclopedist Pliny the Elder recorded one such spell for treating a dislocated limb in his Natural History, noting that the healer must recite a specific chant while applying the bandages. The words themselves were believed to possess inherent power, locking the healing intention of the physical treatment into place. This was not a lack of faith in their medicines. It was an amplification of them. The chant, the prayer, the ritual action, all of it was meant to create the optimal conditions, both physical and spiritual, for the remedy to work its fullest potential. To dismiss this as mere magic is to misunderstand the Roman worldview entirely. For them, it was all simply medicine. While the army's Mulomedici were the elite surgical specialists of the animal world, the vast majority of livestock across the empire never saw a legionary fort. Their health, and by extension the economic stability of entire regions, fell to a different kind of expert, the civilian magister pecoris, or master of the herd. This was not a trained surgeon in the military sense, but rather a highly experienced and immensely practical manager, a man whose expertise was born from a lifetime of observation and the hard-earned wisdom passed down through countless generations of farmers. His domain was the sprawling agricultural estate, the latifundia, where the well-being of hundreds, sometimes thousands of animals was his sole responsibility, making him one of the most crucial yet unsung figures in the Roman rural economy. The role of the magister pecoris was breathtakingly vast. He was simultaneously a geneticist, a nutritionist, a midwife, and a physician for every creature under his care. His success was measured in cold, hard numbers: the weight of his cattle at market, the survival rate of his lambs, the volume of milk his goats produced, and the pristine quality of the wool from his sheep. A single outbreak of disease under his watch could spell financial ruin for the estate's wealthy owner and famine for the local community that depended on its output. Therefore, his knowledge had to be encyclopedic and immediately applicable. He didn't have the luxury of consulting a scroll while a valuable ox was choking. His remedies and procedures had to be second nature, ingrained through a lifetime of practice. This deep reservoir of practical knowledge was a living library, preserved and expanded not in texts, but through oral tradition. A young man training to become a magister pecoris would have learned at the elbow of his father or uncle, absorbing not just the what but the why behind every action. He learned to recognize the subtle early signs of foot rot in a sheep simply by the way it held its head while grazing. He knew which specific patch of pasture, rich in a certain herb, would help cleanse the worms from his flock after the spring rains. He could diagnose the early stages of milk fever in a farrow cow by the faint glaze in her eyes long before she went down. This was knowledge earned through daily, hands-on experience, tested by success and failure, and refined over centuries. It was folk science of the highest order, and its effectiveness was proven by the very survival and prosperity of the herds themselves. We are fortunate that some of this vast knowledge was deemed important enough to be written down by Roman agricultural authors who sought to compile the best practices of their time. The works of men like Columella and Varro are not dry academic texts. They are practical manuals that often read like direct advice from an experienced magister pecoris. Columella's De Re Rustica provides stunningly detailed guidance that clearly originated from these master herdsmen. He instructs his readers on the precise symptoms of a sheep with liver fluke, recommending moving the flock to higher, drier ground. He offers a complex recipe for a medicinal drench for cattle colic, involving leeks, wine, and garlic, noting that it should be administered through a horn funnel. He even details the construction of a sling to support a cow experiencing a difficult birth, a device that would have been fashioned from ropes and blankets by a quick-thinking herdsman in a dusty barn. These texts immortalize the genius of the common farmer, elevating their hard-won discoveries into a formalized body of knowledge that could be shared across the empire, from the olive groves of Hispania to the grain fields of North Africa. The tools of the magister pecoris were far simpler than the surgical kits of the army veterinarians, but no less effective for the tasks at hand. His kit was the farm itself, a secluded, sun-warmed pen for isolating a sick animal, a store of high-quality hay and clean water, the first and best medicine for most ailments, a carefully managed rotation of pastures to prevent the build-up of parasites in the soil. His most valued instruments were his own eyes and hands, constantly assessing, palpating, and observing. For treatments, he relied on the bounty of the surrounding countryside. He would harvest comfrey leaves to create a soothing poultice for swollen joints, known colloquially as knitbone for its reputed ability to help heal fractures. He used common kitchen supplies like vinegar and honey as antiseptics for cuts and abrasions. His role was one of prevention and maintenance, of nurturing health at a herd level rather than performing battlefield trauma surgery. He was the guardian of the empire's larder, and his quiet, consistent diligence ensured that the wheels of everyday life continued to turn, long after the legions had marched away from the frontier. The health of the Roman world depended on more than just the strength of its horses and cattle. It also took flight on the wings of its birds. From the bustling farmyard to the elegant courtyard garden, avian life was an integral thread in the fabric of daily existence, and the Romans developed a surprisingly nuanced understanding of how to care for it. The approach to bird medicine, however, was a tale of two very different worlds, one driven by stark economic necessity and the other by personal affection and status. On the vast majority of Roman farms, poultry was not a hobby, it was a vital source of protein and income. Flocks of chickens, geese, and ducks provided a steady supply of eggs, meat, and feathers, making their health a direct concern for the family's livelihood. The Roman agricultural writers, always focused on practical outcomes, devoted significant attention to their care. A sick chicken was a loss, and an outbreak of disease could wipe out an entire flock. The Magister Pecoris was therefore just as vigilant with his birds as he was with his sheep. He understood the importance of a clean, dry coop to prevent the respiratory ailments that could quickly spread through a crowded henhouse. He knew to isolate any bird that appeared lethargic or was off its feed, recognizing these as the first signs of contagion. Their treatments for common poultry ailments were a blend of sharp observation and resourceful remedy. One of the most frequent issues was infestations of mites and lice, which could cause birds to become anemic and stop laying eggs. The Roman solution was both simple and effective. They provided their flocks with dust baths. They would set aside areas of dry, loose earth mixed with wood ash and diatomaceous earth, a fine, abrasive powder that naturally suffocated and killed the tiny parasites as the birds fluffed their feathers in the dust. For more serious internal parasites, they administered purgative drenches, forcing a mixture of bitter herbs like wormwood down the bird's throat using a small hollow reed. They even had treatments for what they called the pip, a term that likely covered a range of symptoms from respiratory gapeworm to fungal infections in the mouth and throat. One common prescription was to dab the affected area with a feather dipped in vinegar or oil, a direct attempt to soothe the inflammation and dislodge any obstruction. In stark contrast to the utilitarian farmyard stood the sophisticated Roman home, where birds were kept not for sustenance but for pleasure. The sweet song of a caged finch or the brilliant colors of a turtle dove were considered essential elements of a refined household. The ultimate status symbol, however, was the parrot. Imported at great expense from distant India or Africa, these intelligent, talking birds were extravagant luxuries, sometimes costing more than a healthy slave. The loss of such a prized possession to illness was a personal and financial tragedy. This created a demand for a more specialized form of aviary medicine, one focused on the individual patient rather than the flock. Caring for these delicate creatures required a gentle touch and a different kind of knowledge. Roman naturalists like Pliny the Elder wrote about the specific dietary needs of songbirds, noting their preference for certain seeds and the importance of fresh water. They observed that a sudden change in diet could cause digestive distress. For a cherished pet that fell ill, the family might prepare a special gruel of softened grains, or even offer a drop of sweet wine as a tonic. The most common and heartbreaking ailment for any caged bird was a damaged wing or leg, often from crashing into the bars of its cage or being caught by a predator. It is here that we see some of the most tender and ingenious aspects of Roman animal care. Setting a broken wing was a delicate operation that required immense patience. The healer, perhaps the paterfamilias himself or a trusted household slave with steady hands, would first have to calmly secure the frightened bird. Using tiny splints whittled from light wood or even stiff leather, they would carefully align the fragile bone. They would then bind the splint in place with strips of linen cloth, soaked in a mixture of wax and resin that would harden as it cooled, creating a miniature, lightweight cast not unlike those used on horses. The bird would then be placed in a small, darkened basket or a specially designed confined cage to limit its movement and allow the bone to knit. The fact that they attempted such intricate procedures on such small animals speaks volumes about the value they placed on these beloved companions. This careful, compassionate intervention, a world away from the dust baths of the farmyard, reveals a dimension of the Roman character that is often overlooked: their capacity for nurturing tenderness towards the creatures that shared their homes and brought them joy. Yet beyond the familiar world of farm and fortress lay a far more dangerous and spectacular arena of animal care. The roar of the crowd at the Circus Maximus or the Flavian Amphitheater was not just for the gladiators. It was for the terrifying exotic beasts that symbolized the vast reach and raw power of Rome. Maintaining the lions, bears, elephants, and leopards that starred in these deadly spectacles presented a set of veterinary challenges unlike any other, demanding a unique combination of immense bravery, logistical genius, and highly specialized knowledge from the men tasked with their care. These keepers, known as Beschirai, were more than just trainers. They were the unsung veterinarians to the empire's most dangerous prisoners. The first and greatest challenge was simply getting these animals to Rome alive. Imagine the immense undertaking of transporting a full-grown North African lion from the scorching deserts of its home to the bustling heart of the empire. The journey by ship across the Mediterranean was a nightmare of stress, seasickness, and cramped conditions. A Beschiarius assigned to such a transport had to be a master of animal psychology and basic triage. He had to understand that a terrified, dehydrated tiger was more than just aggressive. It was likely suffering from a host of physical ailments. Keeping the creatures hydrated with constant supplies of fresh water, preventing the spread of disease in the filthy, crowded holds, and treating the wounds they inevitably inflicted on themselves or each other in a panic required a cool head and a very long set of tools. The mortality rate during these transports must have been staggering, making every animal that marched into the arena a significant capital investment that had already survived a grueling medical ordeal. Once in Rome, these exotic creatures were housed in elaborate underground chambers beneath the amphitheaters, a dark and noisy world that was the antithesis of their natural habitats. The Beschiarius now became a full-time physician in a most unconventional hospital. His daily rounds involved diagnosing illnesses in animals whose normal behaviors he could only guess at. Did that lethargic bear have an infection, or was it simply depressed from its confinement? Was the elephant's lack of appetite due to a toothache or a broken spirit? Without any reference texts on the care of Indian rhinoceroses, these men had to rely on sheer, daring observation and a process of terrifying trial and error. Treating a sick lion wasn't a matter of administering a gentle drench. It was a military operation. It likely involved luring the animal into a specially designed squeeze cage so it could be immobilized safely, allowing the keeper to inspect its teeth, clean a wound, or apply a poultice to an infected paw, all while the animal thrashed and roared just inches from his face. The bravery required for such routine care is almost unimaginable. Their pharmacopoeia for these exotic patients would have been a fascinating, desperate experiment. They applied the principles they knew from treating domestic animals, but with wild improvisation. Would a honey and wine poultice that worked on a cavalry horse's leg also fight infection in a leopard's bite wound? Would the same bitter wormwood that purged parasites from sheep work on a bear? They likely dosed their charges with massive quantities of familiar herbs, never truly knowing the correct dosage for a 300-kilogram predator. Some treatments were undoubtedly ineffective, but others, born from this brutal practicality, would have worked. They understood the antiseptic properties of certain compounds and the nutritional need for specific diets, going to incredible lengths to source the right food-fresh meat for the big cats, specific foliage for the elephants, to keep them looking healthy and powerful for their bloody debut. The role of the bestiarius was a paradox. He was a healer whose ultimate purpose was to keep his patients alive and fighting fit only so they could be spectacularly killed for the entertainment of the masses, a poignant and brutal reminder of the complex, and often contradictory, relationship between Romans and the animals that shared their world. But knowing which herbs to use was only half the battle. The true art of the Roman veterinarian lay in the meticulous transformation of these raw ingredients into potent, stable, and effective medicines. This was a process that blended the careful precision of an apothecary with the practical hustle of a field medic, a daily ritual of preparation that turned leaves, roots, and resins into life-saving remedies. The journey from a plant growing in a meadow to a salve applied to a wound was a fascinating alchemy of skill and patience. It all began with the harvest, a task governed by a deep understanding of nature's rhythms. The Romans knew that the medicinal power of a plant was not constant. It fluctuated with the seasons, the time of day, and even the phase of the moon. The optimal moment to harvest was believed to be when the plant was at its peak potency, often just before it flowered for leaves, or after the flowers had faded for roots. This required an intimate knowledge of the local flora and a watchful eye on the calendar. Once gathered, the plants couldn't be used immediately in their fresh, moist state, as they would quickly rot and lose their virtue. The next critical step was preservation through drying. Bunches of herbs would be tied together and hung upside down in a shaded, well-ventilated area, like the rafters of a stable or a dedicated storage room. This slow, gentle drying process locked in the active compounds while preventing mold, ensuring the healer had a reliable supply of ingredients year-round. When the time came to create a medicine, the dried plants were transformed into a usable form, most commonly a fine powder. This was achieved through the relentless grinding action of a mortar and pestle. The mortarium, a heavy, coarse-grained pottery bowl with a gritty interior surface, was the workhorse of the veterinary pharmacy. Into this, the healer would place handfuls of brittle, dried leaves, stems, or roots. With the pastillum, a heavy stone pestle, he would grind and crush the material, the abrasive interior of the bowl shredding it into ever smaller particles. This was strenuous, time-consuming work, but essential. A coarse grind would make a poultice feel gritty and unpleasant, and it wouldn't mix properly with liquids. The goal was a uniform, almost fluffy powder that could be easily blended and would release its medicinal properties quickly and completely. This raw powder was the base, but it was inert until combined with a liquid or a fat that would act as a carrier, delivering the medicine to the animal's body. The choice of medium was itself a medical decision, dictated by the type of ailment being treated. For wounds, both external and internal, wine and vinegar were the preferred solvents. The veterinarian would take a measured amount of his herbal powder, say, a mixture of ground yarrow and honey, and slowly mix it with a splash of strong, acidic wine or vinegar in a small bowl. He would stir it relentlessly until it formed a smooth, thin paste. This wasn't just about creating a spreadable consistency. The alcohol in the wine and the acetic acid in the vinegar acted as powerful solvents, pulling the active compounds out of the plant material and into the liquid, while also providing their own antiseptic boost to the final mixture. This medicated paste could then be applied directly to a cleaned wound or, for internal issues, mixed into the animal's feed or administered as a drench. For treating skin conditions, muscular pains, or creating a protective barrier over a healing injury, a fat-based ointment was required. Animal fats like lard or suet, or precious olive oil were gently warmed in a small pot over a low fire until they liquefied. The herbal powder would then be sprinkled in, and the mixture would be stirred continuously as it cooled, allowing the fat to solidify around the tiny particles of medicine, suspending them in a soft, unctuous salve. This created a long-lasting application that would stay in place, slowly releasing its healing compounds while the fat itself soothed and moisturized the injured tissue. The final product, whether a sharp-smelling vinegar paste or a gentle herbal salve, was then carefully transferred into its permanent home, small, handled ceramic pots called unguentaria. These jars, often sealed with a cloth lid tied with string or a dollop of wax, protected the medicine from air and moisture, preserving its potency until the moment it was needed to answer the call of suffering from man's loyal companions. This focus on prevention reveals one of the most sophisticated aspects of the Roman veterinary mind, a profound understanding that true health was built long before any illness appeared. They recognized that a clean environment was not a luxury, it was the first and most powerful medicine. The Roman stable was not merely a shelter, it was a carefully managed environment designed to promote wellness. Writers like Columella provided explicit, detailed instructions for stable management, insisting that floors be paved with stone or packed earth to allow for proper drainage and daily cleaning. Stall bedding, typically straw or hay, was to be replaced frequently to prevent the buildup of dampness and waste, which they correctly identified as a breeding ground for disease and parasites. They even recommended occasionally whitewashing the walls with a lime-based wash, a practice that served a dual purpose. Not only did it brighten the interior, but the lime acted as a natural disinfectant, killing mold and bacteria and creating a more hygienic space for the animals to rest and recover. This wasn't just about tidiness. It was a calculated strategy to break the cycle of infection before it could ever begin. Water, the source of all life, was also a potential source of death, and the Romans treated it with the respect it deserved. They understood that stagnant, contaminated water was a direct vector for illness, therefore ensuring a constant supply of fresh, clean water was a non-negotiable pillar of animal husbandry. On military campaigns, the choice of a campsite was dictated first and foremost by the proximity to a reliable, clean water source. Within permanent forts and on farms, they invested significant effort in hydraulic engineering. They constructed elaborate systems of stone troughs, constantly fed by aqueducts or fresh springs, ensuring that animals never had to drink from a muddy, manure-filled puddle. They observed that animals which drank clean water were simply healthier, suffered less from digestive ailments, and maintained their condition better. This practical understanding of hydraulics and hygiene, applied to animal care, is a stunning example of Roman engineering serving the cause of preventative medicine. Perhaps their most advanced concept, and one that would not be universally embraced again until the 19th century, was the practice of isolation. The Romans were keen epidemiologists who made a crucial connection between proximity and contagion. When an animal in a herd or stable began showing signs of an infectious illness, be it a hacking cough, diarrhea, or a mysterious lethargy, the standard procedure was immediate quarantine. The sick individual was physically removed from the group and placed in a separate, often secluded, pen or stall. The magister pecoris or Mulomedicus caring for it would then be scrupulous about washing and even changing clothes before tending to the healthy animals to avoid carrying the illness back to them. This practice of segregatio was a revolutionary leap in logic. It moved beyond treating the symptoms in a single patient and instead focused on containing the outbreak, protecting the entire herd, the valuable economic or military asset, from catastrophic loss. It demonstrates a clear, albeit pre-microbial, understanding that some diseases could be passed from one creature to another, and that the most effective way to stop it was to break the chain of contact. Finally, their preventative strategy extended to the very fuel they put into their animals, food. Roman animal nutrition was a sophisticated science of its own, based on the principle that a well-fed animal was a resilient animal. They didn't just provide calories, they sought to provide balance. The standard ration for a legionary horse was a carefully measured mix of barley for quick energy, hay for roughage and steady digestion, and occasional grazing on fresh grass when available, which provided essential vitamins. They adjusted these rations based on the animal's workload. A horse resting in garrison would receive less grain than one preparing for a long march, to prevent it from becoming overly hot or excitable. They even used food as a preventative treatment, adding small amounts of believed medicinal herbs like garlic or fenugreek to the daily feed as a tonic to ward off internal parasites and boost overall constitution. This holistic approach, clean stables, fresh water, strict quarantine, and a balanced diet, formed an integrated shield of preventative care. It was a system designed not just to react to sickness, but to create a world where sickness struggled to gain a foothold in the first place. Now, let's ride alongside a Roman Mulomedicus as he faces one of his most feared and frequent adversaries, not on the battlefield, but in the stable. The enemy is silent, invisible, and can kill a valuable warhorse in a matter of hours, colic. Our setting is a forward cavalry outpost in Germania. The hour is late, the torches casting long, dancing shadows on the stable walls. A young a cavalry soldier, bursts into the medic's quarters, his face pale. His prized mount, a powerful black stallion named Niger, is behaving strangely. The Mulomedicus, a veteran named Lucius, grabs his kit and follows at her run, his mind already cycling through the possibilities. The diagnosis begins not with touching, but with watching. From the stable door, Lucius observes Niger. The horse is not at rest. He is shifting his weight constantly, his muscles taut with anxiety. He looks back at his flank, a classic sign of abdominal pain. Then, the horse does something particularly worrying. He attempts to lie down, but almost immediately rolls back onto his feet, only to repeat the process moments later. This relentless, frustrated pacing and attempting to roll is a glaring red flag. Lucius moves closer, his senses on high alert. He hears no gut sounds when he presses his ear to the horse's barrel. The normal, reassuring gurgles of digestion have fallen silent. He notes that Niger is sweating profusely despite the cool air, and when he offers a handful of grain, the horse turns his head away, his nostrils flared in distress. The signs are unmistakable and dire. This is not a simple bellyache. This is a severe impaction colic, a potentially fatal blockage in the intestines. The clock is ticking. Lucius barks orders to the soldier. First, Niger must be prevented from lying down and rolling, an act that could twist his gut and seal his fate. The horse is walked slowly in a circle, kept moving to soothe him and prevent that fatal roll. Now the treatment begins. Lucius retrieves a large, hollowed-out cow horn from his kit, his field-drenching apparatus. He sends the soldier to fetch ingredients: the army's strong, sour wine, a flask of olive oil, and several cloves of garlic from the kitchen stores. Working quickly, he crushes the garlic into a paste, mixing it into a cup of wine. He then adds a generous pour of olive oil, creating a pungent, oily concoction. This is a classic Roman colic drench, each ingredient chosen for a specific reason. The garlic acts as a carminative, intended to soothe gut spasms and fight any internal corruption. The oil is a lubricant, hoping to gently ease the blockage. The wine is both a solvent, pulling the properties from the garlic, and an antiseptic. The administration is a difficult two-man job. The soldier holds Niger's head steady, while Lucius gently inserts the pointed end of the horn into the gap between the horse's front and side teeth, tipping the liquid into the cheek pouch. He does it slowly, allowing the horse to swallow between pores, ensuring the medicine goes down the esophagus and not into the lungs. It's a messy, tense process, but they get the entire dose administered. The walking continues. For the next hour, Lucius watches, palpates the belly for any change, and waits. He knows that if the blockage does not pass, more drastic measures may be needed. The texts describe bleeding the horse to reduce what they saw as an excess of blood causing internal heat and pressure, a procedure he is prepared to perform but hopes to avoid. He also prepares a backup plan, a more complex poultice described in the manuals. He has the soldier heat a large stone by the fire. While it warms, Lucius mixes barley meal with hot water and vinegar into a thick paste. He spreads this onto a piece of coarse linen, creating a large, medicated plaster. The heated stone, wrapped in another cloth, is placed against Niger's left flank, the location of the large intestine, to act as a deep heat compress, while the barley and vinegar poultice is secured over it. The vinegar provides a counter-irritant, while the heat and the poultice are meant to draw the corruption outward and relax the cramped muscles. It is a full-scale assault on the illness, employing every tool and technique at his disposal. The night stretches on, filled with the sound of the horse's distressed breathing and the shuffling of boots on the stable floor. Success is not guaranteed, but the Mulomedicis' systematic, multi-pronged attack, born from centuries of accumulated wisdom, represents the best chance the magnificent Niger has to see the dawn. Yet even as the political unity of the Western Roman Empire crumbled, the indispensable knowledge of its animal healers refused to vanish into the darkness. The sophisticated system of care, so vital to military and economic power, was far too valuable to be lost. The survival of this wisdom through the tumultuous centuries that followed is a testament not to emperors or armies, but to the quiet, dedicated work of scribes and monks who understood its enduring worth. As the legions withdrew and the great roads fell into disrepair, the crucial texts of Roman veterinary science found an unlikely sanctuary within the thick, silent walls of medieval monasteries. These isolated religious communities became the unexpected guardians of classical learning. In scriptoriums lit by candlelight, monks meticulously copied and recopied the works of Roman agriculturalists like Vegetius and the translated manuals of Greek hippiatrists. To them, this was not merely about preserving old knowledge. It was a practical necessity. A monastery was also a large, working farm, its economic survival dependent on the health of its oxen, sheep, and horses. The detailed advice on diagnosing hoof rot, treating sheep bloat, or formulating a herbal drench for colic was as immediately useful to a Benedictine brother in the 8th century as it had been to a Mulomedicus in the 2nd. They preserved this knowledge because it worked, ensuring that the core of Roman animal medicine remained intact, practiced, and passed down, even as the world outside changed beyond recognition. The next great chapter in this story of preservation was written by the scholars of the Islamic world. As Western Europe fragmented, the Eastern Roman Empire in Constantinople and the expanding Abbasid Caliphate became vibrant centers of intellectual activity. There was an active, organized movement to seek out and translate Greek and Roman scientific texts into Arabic. The detailed veterinary manuals, with their blend of Aristotle's observations and practical surgical guides, were considered a precious part of this classical heritage. Arab scholars like Ibn Akai Hizam in the 9th century didn't just copy these texts. They expanded upon them, incorporating their own observations and discoveries from across a vast empire that stretched from Spain to Persia. They refined surgical techniques, added new herbal remedies from their own pharmacopoeia, and systematically compiled this knowledge into new, comprehensive works. In this way, the flame of Roman veterinary science was not only shielded from the gale, but was actively fed and made brighter. This curated and enhanced body of knowledge made a triumphant return to Western Europe through the great intellectual centers of the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Places like the medical school at Salerno in Italy and the universities at Bologna and Montpellier became hubs where scholars, now thirsting for the rediscovered wisdom of the ancients, eagerly translated these Arabic texts back into Latin. The works of Roman veterinarians, now filtered and enriched through centuries of Islamic scholarship, were suddenly available again. They were studied not as historical curiosities, but as cutting-edge medical texts. A Renaissance-era horse doctor in 15th century Florence would have pored over these manuals, seeing in the detailed descriptions of Roman splints, wound washes, and herbal remedies a sophisticated system that was vastly superior to the folk superstitions that had filled the gap in many areas. This direct line of influence is powerfully visible in the work of Carlo Ruini, an Italian nobleman and anatomist writing in the late 1500s. His seminal book, Anatomia del Cavallo, The Anatomy of the Horse, is widely considered the first dedicated work of modern veterinary anatomy, but a closer look reveals its profound debt to the past. Ruini's detailed illustrations of the equine skeleton and muscular system, while groundbreaking in their accuracy, follow a tradition of meticulous observation that Aristotle had pioneered and the Romans had perfected for practical use. His methods of dissection and his systematic approach to understanding the animal body from the inside out were a direct continuation of the rational, hands-on spirit of the Roman Mulomedicus, now amplified by the artistic and scientific tools of the Renaissance. Ruini didn't create his work in a vacuum. He was standing on the shoulders of Roman giants, whose knowledge had been kept alive for him by 1,000 years of dedicated scribes and scholars. The ultimate culmination of this ancient legacy arrived with the formal establishment of veterinary medicine as a recognized profession. The world's first veterinary school was founded in Lyon, France, in 1761 by Claude Bergelet. The curriculum he developed did not spring from nothing. It was built upon the solid foundation of those very Roman and post-Roman texts that had been preserved, studied, and practiced for centuries. The core principles Bergelat taught: systematic diagnosis, rational anatomy, surgical intervention, and the use of a defined pharmacopoeia were all concepts that would have been perfectly familiar to a Roman army veterinarian. The founding of this school did not mark a beginning, but rather a formalization. It was the moment when the accumulated practical wisdom of 2 millennia, a tradition that Rome had systemized and made essential, was finally institutionalized into the science we recognize today. Every modern veterinarian, when they pick up a scalpel, diagnose a colic, or consult a pharmaceutical guide, is utilizing tools and principles that were first sharpened not in a laboratory, but on the dusty frontiers of a long-vanished empire. It's tempting to look back at the Romans with modern eyes and see either primitive witch doctors or impossibly advanced geniuses. The truth, as always, is far more fascinating. To truly appreciate their achievements, we have to step into their world and judge them by their own standards, separating their moments of brilliant, evidence-based insight from the practices that were rooted in superstition or flawed theory. This balanced view doesn't diminish their accomplishments. If anything, it makes their genuine breakthroughs all the more impressive. One of the most persistent myths is that Roman medicine was purely magic and prayer. This is easily debunked by their surgical kits. You don't craft specialized, finely balanced bronze forceps for extracting arrowheads if you believe a chant alone will suffice. Their sophisticated procedures for setting compound fractures with resin-hardened bandages or performing intricate eye surgeries demonstrate a profound, hands-on understanding of anatomy and a confidence in mechanical intervention. These were not acts of faith, they were acts of skilled craftsmanship and observed cause and effect. They knew that physically removing a foreign object and closing a wound gave the animal its best chance, and their success rates, given the era, were likely remarkable. Yet, for all their practical skill, their overarching medical theory was built on a fundamental misunderstanding: the doctrine of the four humors. This idea, inherited from the Greeks, proposed that health was a balance of 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. An excess or deficiency of any one could cause disease. This theory led them to some of their most enduring and detrimental practices, most notably bloodletting. A veterinarian might see a lethargic, feverish horse and diagnose an overabundance of blood, leading to an excess of heat. His logical solution, based on his training, was to drain a significant amount of blood to restore balance. While this might have had a placating psychological effect on the handler, we now know it would often weaken an already sick animal, potentially hastening its decline. Their theory was elegant and internally consistent, but it was built on a completely wrong foundation, leading them to effective solutions almost by accident alongside harmful ones. This intertwining of the rational and the ritual is where modern viewers might get confused. A Roman veterinary manual wouldn't have a neat separation between medicine and magic. A single entry for treating a wound might begin with impeccably sound advice. Clean it thoroughly with vinegar, apply a honey and yarrow poultice, and suture it closed. These steps are all antiseptic and promote healing, but the same entry might conclude with instructions to walk around the animal 3 times counterclockwise while reciting a prayer to Diana. To us, that seems like a bizarre contradiction. To the Romans, it was simply covering all bases. They were applying every tool in their toolkit, the practical, the botanical, and the divine. The prayer wasn't seen as an alternative to the honey. It was a supplement, a way to ensure the honey worked to its fullest potential by enlisting the help of higher powers. They weren't abandoning science for superstition. They were blending them into a single, holistic approach to healing. So, how advanced were they really? The answer is that they were the most advanced practitioners in the ancient world, but that world operated on a different set of rules. They were brilliant empiricists and terrible theoreticians. They could expertly set a broken leg, but believed it was because they were balancing bodily humors. They knew that copper sulfate cured fungal infections on hooves long before they knew what a fungus was. Their greatness lay in their relentless observation, their systematic recording of what worked, and their unparalleled skill in turning that knowledge into practical fieldcraft. They may have prayed for a successful outcome, but they never solely relied on prayer. They always reached for their scalpel, their mortar and pestle, and their detailed manuals, building a legacy of animal care that would not be eclipsed for over 1,000 years. Most of the Roman veterinarians who toiled in the dust of the stables and the blood of the battlefield remain forever anonymous, their expertise known only through the successful recoveries of the animals they treated. Yet, a handful of names did manage to escape the fog of history, not because they were celebrated in their time, but because they had the extraordinary foresight to put their knowledge to parchment. These men were not just practitioners. They were authors, systematizers, and educators, and their surviving works offer us the clearest possible window into the sophisticated mind of the Roman animal healer. Among the earliest and most influential of these figures was Pelagianus Saturninus, who practiced his art in the 4th century CE. His work, the Ars Veterinaria, or the Veterinary Art, is a fascinating compilation that perfectly captures the hybrid spirit of Roman medicine. Pelagianus was a wealthy equestrian, a man of high social standing, which suggests that veterinary knowledge at this level was considered a worthy pursuit for a gentleman. His book is structured as a series of letters, addressed to other knowledgeable horsemen, creating a sense of sharing wisdom among an elite community. The content is a remarkable blend of the ultra-practical and the deeply superstitious. He provides detailed, step-by-step instructions for complex procedures like setting fractures and treating eye injuries, showing a clear grasp of anatomy and cause and effect. Yet, woven seamlessly between these rational prescriptions are elaborate spells and charms intended to be recited over the sick animal. For a single ailment, he might offer both a proven herbal poultice and an incantation to the gods, seeing absolutely no contradiction between the two. His work was less about creating something entirely new and more about being a master curator, gathering the most effective remedies, whether physical or spiritual, from across the empire into a single, accessible guide for the educated horse owner. If Pelagianus represents the aristocratic compiler, then the figure of Publius Flavius Vegetius Renatus stands as the ultimate military systematizer. Writing in the late 4th century, a time when the empire was showing signs of strain, Vegetius undertook a monumental project to analyze why the Roman war machine had been so successful and to prescribe a return to those classic principles. His most famous work, the Epitome Rei Militaris, is a complete manual on how to rebuild and maintain a perfect Roman army, and he understood that no army could function without healthy animals. An entire section of his work, often extracted and circulated on its own as Digesta Artis Mulomedici, is devoted entirely to the care of horses and mules. For Vegetius, veterinary science was not a separate discipline. It was a core component of military logistics and readiness. His approach is relentlessly pragmatic and organized. He methodically catalogs diseases and their treatments, from common lameness to deadly plagues, but his true genius lies in his emphasis on prevention and overall fitness. He provides detailed instructions on selecting the best horses for breeding, on designing optimal stables with good drainage and ventilation, and on creating a year-round conditioning and feeding program to keep cavalry mounts in peak physical shape. He stresses the importance of constant, careful observation, advising officers to learn the normal behavior of their horses so they can spot the slightest sign of illness early. Vegetius wasn't just writing a medical text. He was writing a field manual for commanders, arguing that a general who neglects the health of his animals is as guilty as one who neglects the training of his men. His work became the definitive textbook on military animal husbandry, studied and revered for centuries after the fall of Rome itself. The influence of these authors cannot be overstated. Their texts were copied and recopied, traveling along the empire's roads and sea lanes. A cavalry officer stationed at Hadrian's Wall could consult the same advice on treating a spear wound as his counterpart in Syria. This dissemination of knowledge created a remarkable standardization of practice across the vast Roman world. The recipes for antiseptic wound washes, the techniques for setting bones, and the methods for diagnosing colic became part of a shared professional language, a common corpus of knowledge that elevated the practice from local folklore into a recognized discipline. These written works ensured that the hard-won lessons of one generation were not lost to the next, that a successful treatment discovered in a Gallic stable could be applied in a North African camp. They were the guardians of institutional memory, and through their efforts, the unsung expertise of 1,000 nameless Mulomedici was preserved, allowing the science of Roman animal medicine to reach its incredible peak. What we have uncovered is nothing less than a hidden pillar of the Roman world. The scale and sophistication of their veterinary medicine was not a peripheral curiosity. It was a critical infrastructure, as vital to the empire's success as its legions, its roads, and its aqueducts. Every charge of the cavalry, every shipment of grain hauled across a mountain pass, every triumph celebrated in the Circus Maximus, all of it was made possible by the health and strength of animals, a state of being meticulously engineered and fiercely protected by a dedicated class of healers. This was a system built on a foundation of pragmatic genius, one that understood that the might of Rome did not ride solely on the shoulders of its soldiers, but on the steady, sure feet of their equine partners. The true revelation lies in recognizing how this deep, practical knowledge of animal care was woven into the very fabric of Roman power. Militarily, the Mulomedicus was a force multiplier. His ability to return a wounded warhorse to duty or prevent an outbreak of disease in the pack train was a logistical advantage that few of Rome's adversaries could match. It ensured campaign mobility, supply line integrity, and the shocking, sustained power of the cavalry charge. Economically, the health of the empire's vast herds of cattle, sheep, and goats was the bedrock of its prosperity, providing the food, leather, and wool that clothed and fed millions. The systematic breeding programs and preventative care prescribed by agricultural writers transformed livestock from simple assets into optimized engines of production, directly fueling the Roman economy and ensuring its stability. Perhaps most surprisingly, this story reveals a complex and nuanced Roman relationship with the animal world, one that defies simple categorization. It was a relationship built on a powerful, pragmatic utilitarianism. An ox was valued for its strength, a horse for its speed, a chicken for its eggs. Yet, interwoven with this cold practicality was a genuine thread of compassion and connection. The small tombstones for beloved dogs, the intricate procedures to save a pet songbird's broken wing, the careful administration of medicine to a suffering creature, all speak to an emotional bond that transcended mere economics. This duality is what makes their veterinary science so fascinating. It was a discipline that could hold a precise surgical scalpel in one hand and a sacred amulet to Epona in the other, seeing no contradiction in using every available tool, both rational and spiritual, to achieve a single goal: healing. The legacy of these forgotten healers did not crumble with the empire's fall. Their knowledge, preserved on parchment in monastic scriptoriums and enhanced by Islamic scholars, became the precious seed from which modern veterinary medicine eventually grew. The founding of the first veterinary schools in the 18th century was not a sudden invention, but a formal recognition of a centuries-old tradition of systematic animal care that the Romans had perfected. When we look at the advanced procedures, the detailed pharmacopoeia, and the holistic approach to animal health practiced 2,000 years ago, we are not looking into a primitive past. We are recognizing a profession of immense skill, intelligence, and dedication. The Roman veterinarian was a silent guardian, a master of his craft whose work in the shadows ensured the light of Rome could shine so brightly for so long. Their story is a powerful reminder that history is built not only by emperors and generals, but by the unsung specialists whose expertise keeps the world moving, one healthy animal at a time. But the story of Roman veterinary medicine is just one single, shining thread in the vast and intricate tapestry of the ancient world. For every story we've managed to piece together from fragments of text and rusted iron tools, there are 1,000 more waiting silently in the darkness, their secrets still guarded by time. Think about the sheer scale of it all. An empire that spanned 3 continents and lasted for centuries was not just built on the backs of soldiers and senators, but on the quiet, dedicated work of millions of ordinary people whose professions have been almost entirely forgotten. We've pulled back the curtain on the Mulomedici, but what about the countless others? Who was the master artisan who crafted the glass windows for a wealthy Roman's villa? And what secrets of chemistry and furnace design did he hold? What about the complex logistics of the cursus publicus, the imperial courier system, and the station masters who kept a continent connected with nothing but horseflesh and human endurance? Imagine the lost knowledge of the perfumers who imported fragrances from across the known world, or the architectural engineers who calculated the precise angle for an aqueduct to flow for miles without a single pump. Each of these roles was a universe of skill and tradition, a lifetime of expertise that has now, for the most part, vanished without a trace. The real mystery isn't just what we know about the past, it's the breathtaking depth of what we don't. And that's where this conversation truly begins, and where you come in. We've journeyed together into the stables and operating tables of ancient Rome, but the entire forum is still out there, waiting for us to explore. What hidden corner of history would you like to see us investigate next? What ancient profession captures your imagination? Is it the shadowy world of Roman spies and intelligence gatherers, the frumentarii, or perhaps the intricate craft of the massicists who turned tiny stones into breathtaking stories? Maybe you're fascinated by the shipwrights who built vessels that could brave the open ocean, or the astrologers who mapped the heavens onto human destiny. The choice is yours. Let us know down in the comments which unsung heroes of the ancient world you'd like to see us profile in a future video. Your curiosity is what guides this channel. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the secrets of Roman animal medicine, if you found it surprising and insightful, then do us a huge favor, hit that like button, and subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell. It truly helps us continue to bring you these untold stories from the shadows of history. There are so many more mysteries waiting to be revealed, and we can't wait to share the next one with you.